Jefferson Robbins with NCW Life. When you go out exploring the landscape, it's a good idea to take along a field guide. My guest here today has constructed just such a book, but it's not what you might expect. Cascadia Field Guide came out in 2023 from Mountaineers Books. It looks at landscapes from Alaska to California, from the Olympic Peninsula to Wyoming, through a lens that combines poetry, artwork, and the natural sciences. And for that originality, the book has just won the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association Award for 2023. Derek Sheffield is a poet and author of a number of poetry collections. He's on the English faculty of Wenatchee Valley College, and he's one of 3 co-editors of Cascadia Field Guide. Derek, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I've wanted to get you in the studio to talk about the book for a while, and the award from Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association seemed like a pretty good excuse. Were you surprised by that?
Well, you know, I suppose so, just because I thought we would have a good shot at it, because as we finished making the book, we realized we'd made something special, something that that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And because of that, and also because of the focus on our bioregion of Cascadia, and the awards is focused on the same region, I thought we might have a good shot. But at the same time, it was still a surprise because, you know, they had about 300 nominations. This is from 6 states, including British Columbia. And so, you know, that said, the odds, you know, I mean, even if something seems like it should happen, you and I both know it doesn't always happen. So, but yeah, we were just over the moon at the news. Yeah.
You mentioned bioregions, and that is something I wanted to talk about. That's how this book is formatted. You're not looking at, you can explore Chelan County and find this. You're looking at bioregions like from the Tidewater Glacier up north in Alaska to the Shrub Steppe, which is our area, to the Montanes and the Willamette Valley, the outer coast. How did you decide on the construction of this particular book?
Well, when I first started working on it, which was about 5 years ago, I was thinking about a literary field guide, an artistic field guide to the Pacific Northwest. But then as I started thinking about it some more, I quickly realized that we needed to make this, and the reason is because the first book, I think maybe 8 years ago, came out. The first book kind of like this was a literary field guide to the Sonoran Desert. And I know the editors of that book, and my friend and editor-in-chief of Terrain.org, Simmons Bunton, was part of that book. And when it came out, he knew me, and he knew me as someone who was as much a poet as a naturalist. And he said, "Hey, Sheffield, you've got to do one of these for the Pacific Northwest." And so I thought, okay, well, yeah, that's a great idea. And then I kind of put it off because I had a sense for how much work it was going to be, you know, like, and it was like 10 times more than I thought it was going to be, as it ended up being. But anyway, as I started thinking about it, I thought, you know, we have this amazing movement here in our region, the Cascadian movement. And so I wanted to tie this book with that sense of identity. There are plenty of people in our region, in fact, who think of themselves as Cascadians and not as Washingtonians, Oregonians, British Columbians, Montanans, and so that was part of it. And then 2, we wanted to think about place in terms of the features of the land and the water, not in geopolitical terms, but Cascadia, as we talk about in the book, is really a region defined by a series of interconnected watersheds that exist from Northern California up through Alaska, southwest Alaska. So that's where the bioregional focus came from, and we thought that really fit the nature of this book, and as Liz and then we brought C. Marie on as another editor, as we all started talking about it, we liked how that helped support our approach of acknowledging the animacy of this place.
You mentioned how large the project was, and I think you said also that it was about 5 years in the making from conception to publication. How did you meet and choose your co-editors on this, Elizabeth Bradfield and C. Marie Furman? How did they come on board the project?
Well, I think it was about 6 years ago I started reading Liz Bradfield's work, and I quickly realized that she was just like me in that she was as much, she had a lot of dirt under her nails, and then just as many paper cuts. And I thought, okay, another poet naturalist here, check. I reached out to her. She was immediately enthusiastic about the idea. We started working on it together. And then Liz knew of C. Marie, and together we approached C. Marie, and unfortunately C. Marie joined us, which gave us, the three of us coming together gives us different kinds of diversity, including geographic diversity, because C. Marie lives in McCall, Idaho. I am someone who's made his home here in the shrub steppe and the pine forest for over 20 years, but I grew up in Gig Harbor and in the Willamette Valley, and Liz grew up on the Salish Sea as well. So we liked the kind of different connections to different parts of Cascadia that we were able to bring to the project.
Now, you're a poet and poetry editor by vocation, I think, but did you have other responsibilities on this book? Were you involved in other facets of its selection and construction?
Yeah, the three of us curated, that was a lot of the work. And, as I said, it started, the idea for the book, we started working on it before the pandemic, but then there were hundreds of hours over Zoom during the pandemic, and it was beautiful work to have during that time of isolation, because everything about the Cascadia Field Guide, everything about this project says community, says belonging, says interconnectedness. And so one of the things we did was spend many hours collecting poems for each of the different beings that we had chosen to include in the book. And so we would then sit down and okay, we've got 24 poems for Raven here. We're going to read them all. We're going to take turns reading them aloud, and we're going to find the one poem that we like, that we want to honor Raven in this book. And so, that took a lot of time, and so we curated all those poems. Then we were about 40 poems short. So then we solicited poets in the region, and we helped them edit that work for the book. We found our 14 different artists through a lot of work, all three of us worked together on deciding which artists we wanted to include in the book. And then a lot of the work that we did was, a lot of this book is prose. So we've got visual art, we've got poetry coming together with prose, and as you noted earlier, this is not the typical kind of field guide, and one of the reasons is because you've got three poet naturalists who are writing what you would call a species account in a standard field guide, but they're what we call them are being stories, and we like the term being rather than species, just because it feels more animate.
And I noticed that throughout the book, if you're referring to Raven, you will refer to him as a being, or ravens as a being, or a tree, a ponderosa pine. This being grows here. So I wanted to ask about that choice of word. Where did that come from?
Well, I think that really goes back. We're influenced there by Robin Wall Kimmerer and her book Braiding Sweetgrass, and the work that she's done and she and others have done to really help us start changing the way we think and talk about being in place. Because if we can change it in language, then man, maybe we can actually start living here in a more sustainable way that isn't going to degrade the living systems that we're a part of, not apart from, but part of. And there's a beautiful quote from Thomas Berry that I kind of paraphrase for Cascadia Field Guide, that everywhere we want this this book to reveal Cascadia as a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. It's all about subjectification, acknowledging agency. And so Robin Wall Kimmerer has done some important work in Braiding Sweetgrass and other essays that she's written. And in fact, one of the essays that she wrote was for the Dear America book that you and I talked about a few years ago. So yeah, I think we owe her a big debt.
So I wanted to ask about the process of editing anything, really, poetry, art, when you're confronted by two really great pieces, but you only have room for one. How hard is that decision to make? I mean, how many hard decisions did you have to make to get to this book?
Lots of hard decisions, and that's when you're grateful that you've got 3 editors. You've got an odd number, and so there were times when it was 2 to 1. We tried as much as possible to come to a consensus, you know, but yeah, I mean. And one of the things, we wanted a diversity of poetry in here too, and we wanted poems that were more accessible than less accessible. We've all, you know, run into poems that are, you know, like a brick wall and don't seem to have any entrance. But that's not what we were really after. We wanted inviting poems, because really the audience, our ideal audience for this book is not, we're not looking for other poetry professors or biologists necessarily. I mean, those people are welcome, but really we had more general readership in mind. As you say, people headed out into the woods or along the rivers or up in the mountains in this region. You know, maybe you don't do it all the time, but so many of us here appreciate being part of this landscape, and we wanted to give those people the right company to bring along.
Well, Derek, I wanted to sort of give readers and viewers the idea of what the experience is like to read this book. And again, we're here in Wenatchee. We're in the shrub steppe biome, in the shrub steppe region that is defined in the book. Maybe you could read for us the introduction to shrub steppe from a Cascadia Field Guide. Yeah,
I would love to do that. Thank you. And as you say, this book is organized in communities, and instead of a traditional field guide that would be organized, we would have the plants here, the birds here, the insects here, all sort of separated. And we wanted to emphasize cohesion over division, and that's when we came upon this idea of deciphering these 13 different communities in our region, and organizing the book that way by choosing anywhere from 8 to 12 beings who live in relationship with one another in that community. So this gives you an idea of some of the prose that we 3 of us together wrote and edited. We edited for each other these overview statements for each community, and then there is a being story for each being. So, shrub step. Perhaps a light rain has just moved through morning skies. You close your eyes and take a deep breath, smelling the unique mix of wet rock, bunch grass, dust, lupin, desert parsley, and everywhere the distinctive bites of sagebrush. In this wet light, you can almost feel the pores of stones opening. These moments are especially precious for their rarity. A steppe is a large area of unforested grassland, and Cascadia's shrub steppe receives less than 10 inches of rain during a typical year. But truly, this is a land of contrasts. A 100-degree day is followed by a cold night, and the next afternoon might gush with thunder showers. In summer, the wind blows hot and dusty, while winter's freezing gales swirl with snow. This near desert might appear lifeless and uniform, but as spring arrives, melting snow gives way to an incredible display of wildflowers. Lemon dabs of sagebrush buttercup, pale pinks of prairie star, purples and golds of lupin and balsam root, creamy white to rose of bitterroot, fire orange, globe mallow, and every shade in between, and phlox, wild onion, larkspur, and scarlet gilia. As he shares stories of the time before European settlement, Okanagan tribal member Len Marchand says that grasses were belly high to a horse back then. But in the last 2 centuries, the human impact has been massive. A combination of clearing for agriculture, grazing, overgrazing, human-caused wildfires, motorized recreation, invasive species, and road building for oil, gas, and wind exploration has left only about 40% of this special biome intact. The mostly treeless shrub steppe affords expansive views across rolling hills, flats, and basaltic canyons. Even so, you might hear the clear whistles and flute-like song before you see western meadowlark perched high on a bare and twisting trunk of big sagebrush, bill opening with each liquid note. Listen also for the rustle of grasses as pygmy short-horned lizard crawls in search of ants. And in the night, if you're lucky, you might hear the shrill yips and cries of coyote shivering the air, and remember something you may have almost forgotten about wildness.
And the section goes on to detail some of the beings, as you put it, who reside in the sage steppe. Pygmy rabbit being one, coyote, of course, being another, the vole, the different kinds of sagebrush. So, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a really good way to characterize it. When you were selecting poems, Derek, for this particular work, you didn't just solicit new or accept new. You also looked for some that I think had either been previously published or were out there. And you worked with the estate of Ursula K. Le Guin to archive one poem in this book. Can you read a section of that for us?
Oh, I would love that, yeah.
And I don't know this poem, so please introduce it.
Sure. So, yeah, this is one of the many poems that we found simply by just going through. All three of us have far too many books on our shelves, and there were many pleasurable hours of going back through books. And I know for me in particular, Ursula K. Le Guin is a writer whose work helped form my own sensibility. She's very important to me as a poet and a prose writer and her fantasy. I loved her books when I was a kid growing up, and so yeah, this was one that we found, and I think I found in one of her books that was on my shelf, and we were so grateful to find existing poems, because it's a fraught prospect to ask someone to make art, and it usually goes okay, but sometimes not always. So this is her poem called Lesser Senses, and if I may, I want to just show you too the artwork that. All the artwork in here was made for the book, and this is the art for Big Sagebrush made by Emily Poole, who's this marvelous Cascadian artist from Eugene, Oregon. Lesser Senses. Thinking of beauty as sight, we keep forgetting the warmth of the fire and the brightness of firelight. In the graceful ripples, the grace of water to thirst. Soft as air, the touch of fur on the touching hand is as beautiful, surely, as the curve of the cat's leap. No keener beauty than a dry branch of sagebrush, the harsh, poignant scent bringing the silent desert distances back to the heart.
Lovely. Thank you. Derek Sheffield is co-author of the Cascadia Field Guide. You can find more poetry that he's selected at terrain.org, where Derek is the poetry editor. The most recent collection of poems is Not for Luck. And Cascadia Field Guide is available wherever your books are sold, preferably your independent bookstore, which is where I got mine. Derek, thanks a lot for being here.
Hey, thank you, Jefferson. Great to see you, man.
Really appreciate it. You're watching the NCW Life channel.